Hello, my abnormal family. Welcome to Abnormal Investigations. If you have not subscribed, I'd like to invite you to subscribe, ring the bell, and select all to get all of our latest uploads. And we are a growing channel, so if you'd like to hop on in now. It's the best time to get in as well. It's growing. I have an encounter for you I'd like to share, if my allergies will allow me to. But let's jump into it, guys. There's something the government is hiding from us, something in the national and state forests. I've seen exactly the abominations they deny. Don't believe the lies they are telling. It is not safe in the woods. We are being hunted. Here is my encounter. When I graduated high school, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do out of school. I decided to take a break and figured life out. To figure life out. This gave me tons of free time to go out and do the thing I love the most. Hunt. I've grown up hunting and fishing my whole life. Starting at a very young age, following my father into the woods with a rifle taller than me, fighting the pine boughs as they whipped back into my face from my father pushing them forward. I've seen countless animals in the wild, and I've been taught what to look for, listen for, and to smell for. I grew up in the woods. It's second nature to me. My house is by a state forest an hour and a half away from the White Mountain National Forest. The forest surrounds a bald mountain with an abandoned fire tower at the top. Because of my property's location to the forest, the wildlife around my house has always been plentiful. Most of the time, if I wanted to go hunting, I could just step out the back and hunt the old logging roads and intersect with the forest, like a giant cobweb. I knew it like the back of my hand, always being wary to stay off the protected land, as it is illegal to hunt and harvest and not to do that on protected land. I did not want to forfeit away my greatest pastime. I always tended to stay away from the border, though. It always gave off a weird aurora. Like there was always a dark haze starting right at the property line, looking into the forest. It always seemed like it would swallow you up. The canopy seemingly thicker because of the old growth. The trees were immense, and the gnarled, dotted with disease and fungus, making it so the light barely makes it through the diseased leaf layers. These trees were so dense, casting discolored shadows that dance and creep along the forest floor. The brush was entangled within itself like barbed wire. Not only was it physically impregnable, but visually, it was like looking at a wall. All you could see was a few feet into the undergrowth, only able to pick up a glimpse of movement. Never able to focus on what you thought you saw, but no matter how thick it was, I always felt like something was watching me. I never felt at ease when I was in eyesight of that forest. Now, deer season up here starts in the late fall for muzzleloader and even later for rifle. Still being early in the season, I had a muzzleloader to go out with. For those of you who don't know, a muzzleloader is basically a musket. You have to ramrod powder and a bullet down the barrel, then have to set the primer in the breech to be able to set off the gun. This was all I carried into the woods. Traveling light was always a good bet, unless you have to carry out, especially if you're dragging a 200-pound dead weight behind you, like a deer. It was the first big snowfall of the year, and with it comes a nice change of pace. Without the fresh snow, you can trace deer, but it's even easier when the snow falls. All you had to do was come across some tracks. My dad had taught me the best way to go about this is to cover as much ground as possible, so I hopped into my car and hit the back roads, slow rolling with my window down, so my breath wouldn't fog it up, looking out for any disturbances in the freshly fallen snow. I drove for hours looking for tracks and couldn't find any. I figured all the deer were bedded down, the weather making them not want to move. I was about to call it when I turned down the last road on my usual route. There in the snow, crossing the road, were deer tracks. Finally, I got out of my car to investigate further. The tracks were splayed out, and I left a deep impression, meaning it was a decent-sized deer, most probably a buck. I followed them to the edge of the road, and I looked where they wandered. I realized they were going the wrong way, straight into the state forest. Now, since this wasn't the main entrance to the forest, there were no signs. Just one old, tattered, washed-out posted sign barely visible. Usually I wouldn't have passed up this opportunity. But this season had been a bust. I had several game cameras out in my usual spots and no signs of life. And I haven't seen any other sign until today. Seeing this fresh sign made me mull over my options. I really wanted a chance at this deer. I thought of excuses I could tell anyone who confronted me. With the few cheap excuses I conducted, I decided to give it a shot. I'd park on the other side of the road, plus I was on a very rural road. No one should be back here anyway. So, it was decided then. I pulled off to the side of the road and prepared to go out and track this deer. I got out, put on my camouflage, and sprayed myself down with scent neutralizer. If it happened to come in upwind of my scent, I would be masked. I also dipped a rag in some doe uterus, or estrus, and I had to tie up to the boots so I could drag it behind me, leaving a scent trail of my own that no self-respecting buck and rut could resist. I grabbed my muzzleloader, put the primer, and stuffed a few extra rounds in my pocket with some powder. I headed out and started to track this deer, walking extremely quiet. Every step was calculated. One less noise, the better. As I was watching the ground, I noticed it had started to snow once more. You could hear the snow crackle as it landed in the edge of my vision, being washed out by the snow. Not enough to mask the tracks, but enough to hinder your senses. This would allow me to close the distance on the deer even closer. The perfect storm was coming together. The environment was perfect for a hunter, a predator of the 21st century. I was in my element. I start down the track once more, following this trail, deeper into the bush, getting enveloped into the mindset of a hunter. Stopping, listening, looking, and then a step forward. Rinse and repeat. As I went along the tracks, I noticed something. The deer seemed to be speeding up. The tracks started to elongate. The well-defined hoofprints started to drag in the snow as strides were becoming faster, less carefully placed in lieu for the speed. I started as a trot and then developed into a full bounding jog. Something must have spooked it. I must have given myself away. I was quite upset, the snow around my collar melting as I got red in the face. I needed to sit and calm myself and think of how I messed up this hunt. I picked a tree to sit against so I could break up my silhouette. I sat there for a while, letting myself cool off, replaying my walk in the woods, analyzing every little thing I did. The weather hadn't stopped soon, and I was covered in a dusting of snow. Sitting there, I started to hear something. I strained my ears to listen over the snow. It was settling on my coat. The falling snow had defining silence, but I was also camouflaged in it as it had covered me. But I could hear something from my left. I could hear movement, the fainted crunch of snow and snapping of frozen underbrush. Something was coming my way. My heart skipped. I instantly started to set up. This must have been the deer. It circled back to get upwind. Believe me, I thought it was the doe scent from the rag I had tied to my boot. The view I had from my spot wasn't the best, with several trees in the way, but good enough to get a shot since I shouldered my rifle on my right. I tried to stay still as much as possible. Any movement now could spoil the hours been spent by hunting this. My anticipation was killing me. I couldn't wait to see this thing. The second felt like hours, the anticipation shooting and jolting down my spine, making me sweat. From the white curtain of snow that made up the edge of my vision, I could see branches starting to give. A glimpse of antlers. This deer was a prize. I could barely see anything, and I could already count at least 8 points standing high off the ground. I picked up my muzzle loader and steadied it on my knee. I wanted to wait for it to come closer so I could get a more decisive shot. My heart was pounding. I had raging buck fever. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I waited. I was vibrating with excitement. This was so real. It wandered closer and closer into view with each step. And I noticed there was something weird about this. It was dragging its back leg. It was already injured. I could hear it raking the ground with its leg, pulling leaves and debris along with it. No, not a leg. My blood ran cold and my stomach turning in knots. This thing wasn't a deer. I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what this thing was. My excitement turned into fear. It was like I turned into a scared little boy again, afraid of what was under my bed. I could sense the maliciousness of this energy, and this thing was expelled its being. It wasn't right. It wasn't real. It wasn't of this earth. It was unholy, sent from the hell of torment. I froze, my only hope being that the snow would fall fast enough to disguise myself as part of the landscape. I could now start to clearly see it. It had antlers, but was no deer. Its back was to me, hunched over, dragging, the poor thing dragging what had brought me here, that I can only assume was the deer that got me into this situation. The deer was gored and slashed about. The ribs were splintered and twisted. It was dragging it from its hind leg. Its other leg snapped and splayed about. The side of its head was completely caved in. This deer hadn't just died, it had been attacked and viciously mauled. I watched as this creature heaved this deer through the woods, leaving a trail of blood and bile as it went. It stood on a powerfully thin frame, emaciated but strong, and tendons flexed under its skin as it walked, as if the skin was the only thing holding this thing together. Its spine and ribs were exposed in spots, like the flesh was torn from its body but never healed, perpetually rotting. You could see the shoulder blades and the muscle as it pulled what remained of the deer along. Then, with one arm still on the deer, it wheeled about, as its grotesque covered in patchy fur and flesh, its claws long and dripping with fresh blood. As my eyes followed the outline of its lean body, it brought me to its head. It had no face, just a skull, none of which was recognizable. There was no skin left on it, just flesh shredded and shriveled. There was no nose or ears, or just holes where they should have been. The teeth were prehistoric, jagged and vicious. The eyes or the eye sockets were so deep you could not see past the brow. The only reason I knew it had eyes was a small white glint off of them from the little light that you could make through the overcast sky. This abomination had no place on this planet. My fear turned to rage as I watched it. I wanted this thing dead. It didn't belong. I tightened my now frigid hands around my muzzleloader. I contorted my body to look down the sights and took aim at this thing. I aimed right for the chest. I squeezed the trigger and the black powder rifle then exploded out, the end of my barrel blocking my view. As the smoke wafted away, I watched in horror. The thing rolled around on the ground, scratching and grabbing at its back and chest with its claws, leaving gashes and cuts through its exposed bone, tearing away its own skin. It staggered up, writhing, then it screamed, making trees drop, the snow clinged to their branches. The scream was shrill, hollow, sounding like everything dying, like a dying animal at once. It was terrifying. I could see that my bullet broke right through the rib, and I swear I could see through the hole the bullet bored into it. I watched as this creature's head darted frantically, scanning its surroundings, snapping its jaws, saliva spilling from its snout. Something in my thoughts. It probably wasn't the first time it had been shot. It looked around crazed to find that its assailant. I knew that it was looking for me. It was smelling the air. After a few breaths it stopped, slowly craning its neck till it was looking at me with both its dark eyes, looking directly at me. I followed its head as it looked down to my boots, my damn rag. I forgot all about it as I was observing this monster. It was like it was taunting me with its eyes, waiting for me to make the first move, tormenting me. It screamed at me and it opened its elongated maw, exposing rows of needle-like teeth, spitting coagulated blood at me. It had found me. I sprang up the snow that had once hid me. I burst and ran. I saw this was a dense pine thicket not too far. I ran as fast as I could. As I ran into the dense brush, then something smashing through the branches above my head, I ducked just in time to see a carcass of the deer spin over my head, making contact with the tree just to my right. I heard the spine of the deer pop as the force of the impact made it wrap around the tree. It screamed again. I could feel the impacts of its strides as it came after me. My lungs were on fire as I pushed myself deep into the pines to get away. Anything I could do to get away from this thing. I couldn't hear it, but I knew it was following me, and then I heard the crashing through the brush. It was closing on me. I ripped the rag from my boot, and I threw it as far from me as I possibly could, rushing past it until I found a big enough tree to hide behind. I pressed my back against the tree and rammed my muzzleloader with the powder and a bullet, then slamming a new primer into the breech. I didn't know what to do. I was obvious bullets had no real effect on this thing, and I was scared to death. I've got to get the hell out of here. I have to shoot it, then run. It was my only chance. As it come walking through, I seen it one last time, knowing that a shot to its body may not kill it and that I could not reload fast. I decided to shoot it in the knee. I let the shot rip out. I seen its knee explode. It fell to the ground screaming. I ran as hard as I could to my truck, and as I made it to my truck, I jumped in and started it, slinging snow all past the back tires as I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. I could still hear it screaming, but knew I had wounded it to where it was not able to move as fast as it once did. I made it home. I have never hunted again in this area, and I won't go back, and I'm now 28 years old. I want to hunt, I miss hunting, but I cannot get myself to go out there because I know what waits. People, these national forests are not safe. They house things. The forests were not made for us. I believe they were made for them. What do you think?